Welcome. Are you ready? A refresher for friends who are using Godly Play and Faith and Play stories. I'm Melinda Wenner Bradley, the Director of Communication and Training for Faith and Play Stories. And we're going to walk through the presentation that was live earlier this week for friends thinking about how are we getting ready to resume or go back to programs to start them up for a new year or to be continuing from this point. I will add a quick disclaimer or caveat that we call this a fall refresher for friends, but want to recognize that friends use Godly Play and Faith and Play in other parts of the world, and it's not fall in the Southern Hemisphere. So really just consider this a refresher for you at any time where you want to think about how you are beginning or continuing and going a little deeper with your practice. So the first thing is to think about how are we ready ourselves? How are you as a storyteller, as a door person, as somebody who's supporting a children's program, using these stories, supporting the other people who are using them? How are you ready yourself? And I want to begin with a quote that the Godly Play Foundation shared this week from Jerome Berryman. And it's a beautiful reminder and really the right place to start. Reverend Dr. Berryman said, "Be easy on yourself. Be kind and gentle, and let the silence in the lessons carry them. Don't think you have to know it all at the beginning. Know that as you get better, like many things, it gets to be more fun because it gets internalized and it becomes a part of who you are." So, what do you need as you return to or start or restart a program? What do you need to be ready, to be centered and be open to what will unfold for you in the coming time? What feels new or different in this season? So, those are a couple questions to think about for yourself. And how can you open the way for new volunteers? Are there some folks you want to invite into the program and what's happening? Can you share a story with them? Invite them to support you with getting the room ready with materials. Might you train a new door person? So we will share links to some of the things that are mentioned in the presentation, like the door person role in a nutshell, which is a handy thing to share with somebody to help walk them through having that part of the room that they are holding as the door person and what that role means. And just to lift up that accompaniment for you is vital. Friends have a long history of accompaniment for people who are in ministry, and this is ministry to be with the children, to be doing the work of the story circle in the room. And so there's both practical support you might need and pastoral care you might ask for. Can people pray for you or hold you in the light? How might other committees of the meeting support what's happening in the program for children? Might you work together with a worship and ministry committee or ask for care from care and counsel? How might the property committee be helpful to you with the space that you're using? Um, so how might you broaden who is accompanying you and the children in the coming year? Continuing revelation of new learning, new truth, opening of new ways of being with spirit. How can you continue to deepen your practice in this method? On the left is it's meant to represent the training folder that you received if you attended a core training for friends, a playing in the light training. Remember that we didn't read it much and during the training that you attended because it's now there for you as a resource. So there are many things in there that might be good touchstones or reminders that you might read. I try to also reread Teaching Godly Play by Dr. Berryman and Children's Spirituality, What It Is and Why It Matters by Rebecca Nye at least once a year. Both of them are texts that have a lot of wisdom about this method and why we do this work. And I find that there's something new for me every time I read them. A relatively new addition to these resources for the storyteller, the mentor in a godly play, faith and play space, is Reverend Dr. Cheryl Miner's new book, Godly Play in Middle and Late Childhood. It is, I think, really a pair now with the Green Teaching Godly Play book. It speaks to how this method works with children who are a little older. The idea that sometimes people have the godly play or faith and play are really for preschool and early elementary. Dr. Miner talks about working with older children and even youth, which I certainly would agree and have had wonderful experiences with, and provide some really practical ideas for things like response time or wondering. It is a really wonderful new book. And then on the Godly Play Foundation website, you'll find the Beloved Me, Beloved We project and the Equity Audit Toolkits. So this is the work that Godly Play is doing to address inclusion and racism. And there are adjustments that have made to both the language and the images, the materials of stories. And many of the new versions have been made available as a free download or template that you can find on the Godly Play Resources website. Some of the stories that are included are listed there, and there are some others that are also in development. So you can go and find the new language as well as images to download and to refresh those stories on your shelves. How do we get ready to support the circle of children and their families? How do we reach out and help prepare them to come back to or resume um, a godly play, faith, and play program, or that is part of what they're experiencing in their program at meeting? I'll just say this, we're going to come back to this picture and mention it, but thanks to Nancy St. John, who's a godly play trainer, for this idea of creating a story that tells the story of telling a story, so to speak, and walks a child, walks them through what happens during a godly play story session. Children do better when they know the expectations, and this is a lovely visual reminder of that for them. So what we do before we even cross the threshold with the first child is so important, how we get ready. And thinking about space and time and relationships. So space, thinking about the room and the fact that it is both a learning place and a sacred space. We'll talk a little bit more about materials, and also time and schedules. How do we set that up and how do we share it? But relationships really are at the center of this. So the idea of perhaps sending invitations or a welcome to the families who have children in your meeting or church. Include a picture of what the space looks like that they'll come to for their program. Maybe a reminder about getting ready before we cross the threshold. Some kind of a welcome that helps them know what they're going to expect. I think for us as the adults in the space, remembering that we're all newcomers when we return, even if it's the same children who you were with last year. There are some are older, taller, they've had new experiences. It is worth taking the time to really rebuild the circle, to get to know each other again. Maybe you don't need a story the first Sunday. Maybe it's really about taking the time to be in community, to build the circle, to talk about how we're going to be ready to have a feast together in some way. And that idea again of taking children through a story about being together in the circle from Nancy St. John's idea. And I also want to lift up an idea that's not new, but was new to me in thinking about getting ready for this year, which is the idea of creating a visual schedule for a Godly Play, Faith, and Play story session. This is something that is often used in classrooms for children with autism, and can be helpful for them to have a guide to follow. You can print it out and laminate it, and a child who needs that structure of following along, knowing what's going to happen next, and that the pictures are visual cues for them. We'll add a link to that along with this recording. And that's a work in progress and an experimental idea. So would love to hear from people about ways they might be doing that kind of thing. We continue to feel the effect of the pandemic on children and families. And just to remember as we get started again, that the existential questions that the stories help us come close to are still present. They're always present, but they may feel more acute, or be causing some sense of a need to be tender with the children and with their families. So those in Godly Play, we talk about those being aloneness, freedom, and what does it mean to be free, the need for meaning and purpose, and death. So big questions that continue to be on children's minds. Communicating with families and the meeting. Think about having a parent orientation, a parent story session, for parents and caregivers, maybe grandparents, the people who are supporting the children coming to meeting. Let them experience a story and wonder about it, and even have a response time. Let them lean into the experience that the children are having and know it more themselves experientially. You might encourage families to have a kind of response time space at home, that might include art materials, a finger labyrinth, maybe just thinking about a quiet place in the home, a place for respite, and to have some free, silent space that they might need at some point in their days. That response time, of course, sometimes looks like art, and sometimes looks like working with the story, and sometimes it looks like resting. So, encouraging families to think about the need that children have throughout their days, not only after hearing a story on first day, to have a place that is their own, where they don't need to share about what they've created with art, for example, but that is for their own comfort. And then wondering questions are such a wonderful tool for daily reflection to share with families. And we'll include a link to the Wondering Project that trainer Sally Thomas has created, that has a beautiful visual image that can be printed out and kept on the kitchen table, and used to reflect on their days with children and the whole family. You might also share with families some version of the 10 best ways for parents. Um, that's an image from 10 best ways there with it, and we'll include a link for that. So that's something you should really craft for how your program works. But again, that share something with families. So there's a sense of connection with all of these things between what happens in the room at meeting and at home, that there's a sense that wondering together and having space for response are things that are available to us. They're spiritual practices that can move between home and meeting community. So, thinking about spaces and materials, how are we getting ready? This is a great time before you begin to do a review of your materials in your story space. Look in each basket and box, and I always have fun reacquainting myself with the stories, but it's also a good time to look for missing or misplaced pieces. Something from one parable box may have found its way to another parable box and needs to be moved back. So really, this is a good time to make sure that your stories are ready. It's also a good time to refresh your art materials. If you have art that is part of your response materials, Things that dry out, like markers and glue sticks, should be replaced. Is there something new you want to add and to bring out occasionally for response time? Is there a story you want to add to your shelves that you need to make or purchase the materials? And if this is something that you have any questions about the materials, you can reach out to Faith and Play Stories, and we can provide some guidance on where to find something or how to make it. This is a good time to take a fresh look at the room or the space that you use through the lenses of addressing racism and nurturing inclusion. Um, Look at the images on walls, the people in your story materials, the books that are in a basket if you have that in your space. Um, is there diversity of the people and among them, both your people that you use for the Hebrew Bible, sacred stories and godly play, and if you have a basket of people or people in your baskets for faith and play stories, to make sure that there's a diversity of shapes and sizes and colors, and that a child will see themselves in the story when they're using those materials or hearing a story. And then you might think about your response time choices. Might you add a self-care basket with lotion or aromatherapy? Is there a place simply to rest with pillows? Is there room for that? Might you use other kinds of things that, again, really are spiritual practices that we're introducing, like a singing bowl, finger labyrinths, a settling jar, a mini Zen garden? I keep those on a shelf and call them the silence materials, some of them. There are relatively cheap wooden finger labyrinths on Etsy. And I made a really big settling jar out of a clear glass water bottle and used um, you can find a recipe for how to use glue or glycerin and glitter online to make that. So what other kinds of things might you think about adding something new for response time choices? So time. Being ready with your planning and also calendars. This is one example of a calendar we used a couple years ago at my meeting. We chose the theme Be the Light, and across each month had a theme of some kind. We don't use Godly Play and Faith and Play every week. It's sprinkled throughout our calendar, which seems to be what most people are doing in meetings. But we marked that for families. And we also printed this out and gave it to families. I have a theory that if you have put a calendar on the fridge and know what's happening, it's a little harder to say, let's just stay home today. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it seems like putting this information in people's hands is a good idea. So again, we're returning to routines, and that takes time and intention. And keeping in mind that children, if they're coming back to a children's program at meeting or church after a summer not being there, that they're also returning to school this time of year and maybe quite tired the first couple weeks. So again, maybe taking some time to reground your relationships and building the circle as a way to begin, and also knowing that they are reacclimating in more than one place. As you think about your planning before they even arrive, to plan for why. Why does your meeting offer a children's program? Is it because you want children to have a grounding in Quaker faith and practice? Is it because you want to offer a place for children to have their own space and allow their parents to be able to attend meeting for worship? There may be different answers here that can help shape what you do and the how of your planning. So I think starting with why and really having clarity about that can be helpful. As you're creating a program calendar, think about ways that you can use both synchronous and in person, and also asynchronous and online or not in person possibilities. for participation. How does that help to foster inclusion and a sense of welcome? If a family cannot or won't be there on a particular Sunday and you're sharing a story, might you share a YouTube recording of that story with them that they can watch another time during their week? But they know that you were thinking about them and miss them, and you want them to have the experience of that story. What could be shared for families for home that connects with the stories that you're sharing? Again, we'll share the Wondering Together questions. And also going to share a link to the What's Next Planning Guide, which is a way of really encouraging an RE committee, but also the whole meeting to think about what has been working and giving you joy. What might you rethink for the coming year? Because this is bigger than just the people who are holding this ministry and on a religious education committee. The meeting is holding, we hope, the whole program as well. So the meeting's role to connect friends across generations, particularly younger and older friends, to connect young people with adults who can mentor and walk with them, accompany them, and connecting parents with other parents who can accompany them on their faith journey and parenting journey. So there are lots of people, places, well, and people, but lots of places, again, where more than one committee of the meeting might be thinking about how you are supporting families and their participation in your community. It's not only the work of the Religious Education Committee, but others working together as well. And that quote from Elise Boulding that feels so important, the need for child-adult friendships that are outside the family. Adults at meeting are such a wonderful source for that accompaniment for children and young people. And one of the places this might happen is in intergenerational worship. So thinking about going into this coming season, thinking about is there an opportunity to share a story at the beginning of an intergenerational worship? And by that I mean all ages are together for the whole time in worship. A story can really be an anchor at the beginning of that time. There may be familiarity for the children in hearing it. It may open new things for adults. So stories being shared to begin that kind of an experience. I'm also going to link to a story that's on the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting website about meetings that have also created spaces in their worship room or worship space for children to be there during worship. So some pillows and a small table, a basket of books, pretty simple things. And there's some nice pictures in the story. But the unspoken message of a family walking into a meeting's worship space and seeing things that are there for children, that welcome them in that space, that's a strong message of you are welcome here. We are ready for you. This is an example, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's an example of if you do try an all ages worship, the kind of message that you might send out in advance to the meeting community, or that you might, the way this is worded, hand out to people as they enter worship. You might have your greeter hand something like this on a half sheet of paper to people. It's really helpful for adults to know what's going to happen. In the same way, we try to set up expectations and children to know the routine in a godly play, faith and play space. In this case, helping adults know what to expect in all ages worship can be helpful for them. There's some of those pictures of meeting houses, spaces in different meetings where they have designated a specific part of their worship room as a place where a family or children on their own might be comfortable participating in worship. in that space in the room. So, some exciting news from Faith and Play Stories. Faith and Play Stories has received a generous grant from the Shoemaker Fund. And that project is a 2-year project. It begins in September, and will include a number of things that we're really excited about as we look toward the 20th anniversary of Faith and Play in 2025 next year. So the grant is going to allow us to expand training, to complete work on new stories that have been in progress, to support capacity for administration and communication. And we know how this work helps to nurture people. And so, hoping to use an expansion of meetings who are using godly play and faith and play to grow that ministry of nurturing families and meetings and intergenerational spiritual community. So we are grateful to the Shoemaker Fund for this support and looking forward to what will grow over the next couple of years. If you have not subscribed to Faith and Play Stories through the website, please go and do that, because that's how we'll communicate with people about new workshops, new stories, the trainings that are upcoming. Will be communicated on the website and through the emails that we send from there, and also on social media. Faith and Play is on Facebook and on Instagram. So, are you ready? We hope that there have been some ideas here that might support you or spark new ideas of your own. We would love to hear from you. Info@quakerfaithandplay.org, and let's stay in touch.